Hey YouTube, so I'm not in front of my normal blue wall this week. We're going to do a different kind of video, and it's more along the setting here in my office as the JKR University videos that we've been doing for our Patreon. But I thought this would be a really interesting topic. So over the past, 14 years now or whatever we've been on YouTube, we keep getting comments about how expensive these animals are, how it's ridiculous this is so expensive, and that the business of ball pythons is wrong, etc., etc., etc. And so I thought it'd be really interesting to actually explore why ball pythons are so expensive, why some of them are, and why now some of the morphs are so inexpensive. We're going to kind of dive into the world of the business of ball pythons and just understand what is the governing factors for the pricing. So you probably guessed it from the very beginning. Honestly, the only thing that ever controls pricing is supply and demand. You can't have one without the other. So first question is, why are ball pythons in such great demand? They're a fantastic species as a pet. They're small, they're relatively calm, they sit in your hand. But the main thing is that ball pythons have become the pet of choice for reptile breeders all over the world because they are an incredible color palette, have absolutely anything you can almost imagine as far as the colors and the patterns, and you can have it in a nice, easy to keep little package that's a good personality. And so they are massively in demand in the pet trade all around the world. So we've established there's a good demand for ball pythons in general. So the big question all comes down to the supply. The main thing to realize is that most mutations start out as a single animal or a couple animals brought out of Africa or somehow discovered in a collection. And so there is absolutely just one animal. It's like a unicorn or a Mona Lisa. There is literally one. The difference is that can be reproduced and made into a product that eventually tens of thousands of people can enjoy. And really, there's massive demand from breeders all over the world who would love to be part of that chain of creating more of this. The breeder may take a few years and put a lot of time and effort to developing this project, a lot of personal expense, and then they may make 3 or 4 after a while. And suddenly there's massive demand for those 4, and so that breeder is highly incentivized to create a price that is reflective of the amount of demand and how hard they are to make, and make sure they make their money back and is well compensated for their time in making these in the beginning. So a real world example of how this works would be the Dreamsicle project. JKR was the very second person to produce the Dreamsicle, and we actually sold one of the very first animals for about $40,000. And so at that time, just to justify that price and understand that price a little bit, there was only maybe a small handful of Dreamsicles in the world at that point, and the one I was selling was a male, which would be very, very useful to making more. Plus there was a massive, massive demand for that project. It was absolutely one of the pinnacle ball python projects at the time and there was not so much variety like there is now. So at that point I had about $30,000 just into the 2 parents, the original grandparents actually, of the Dreamsicle project, plus a lot of time and effort. And making that Dreamsicle and selling that Dreamsicle was a chance for me to justify all that price plus the massive demand. There was literally a dozen people who would have given me $40,000 for that animal at that time. So massive demand. As the price began to fall in that project, we found that the demand grew each time. So later on, when the Dreamsicles became about $20,000 each, I was able to sell 4 or 5 or 6 of them in 1 year. And there was literally dozens and dozens of people asking me for them. As they got down to 10,000 and 5,000 each, we could sell 100 of them a year. If we could possibly make 100, which we can't at this point. You see how as these difficult mutations, as they become more and more common, the price falls, but the demand also grows exponentially because that price point falls in the range of more and more people. Another example would be the Pompeii, which of course is one of the high-profile JKR snakes that we released in the last few years. So that is 4 codominant, incomplete dominant genes and 1 recessive, extremely difficult to make. So in the 4 years approximately since we've made the Pompeii, we've only made 4 more Pompeiis since then. They're very, 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 very difficult. Contrast that with the fact that literally I'll get 1,000 inquiries a year on that project and people wanting to make that project. And so you see that the supply is nowhere near the demand, and the only way the supply will ever meet the demand is by selling these animals to other breeders who will then take and put them into their collection and keep working the projects. So eventually, I don't know if you'll ever see a Pompeii in Petco, but eventually it'll come down to a price that is very, very affordable, and there'll be some other crazy peak ball python combo that people will aspire to make someday and will also command those prices. So those are two kind of descriptive examples of complicated mutations, but now we're looking at a simple one. It does start pretty high, but it has a much faster trajectory downwards because it's so simple to make. And that would be a banana or a coral glow. Those, back when they started really hitting the market, they were running between $30,000 and $50,000 each. And they were very, very, very expensive and very desirable because it was one of the most impressive single gene ball python mutations ever found. It's absolutely incredible. But what we found is that they're also very, very, very easy to make because it's a simple process. You can breed a banana coral glow to anything and make half of them will be coral glows or bananas. So the process by which many, 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 many more of those were made was much faster. Therefore, the price kept getting cut in half and cut in half. And now suddenly, just about 10 years later, here we are, and they are in Petco's and PetSmarts and your local pet stores because the supply was able to get close to the demand relatively quickly. Where these other mutations, it's going to be decades before we ever see that supply really come down to that pet trade level. So that's just a little bit of an explanation for why ball python prices are so high. And if you're into business and you understand the market, you understand that that explanation is not any different than any other industry in the world. The difference is that we're selling essentially the means of production to each additional breeder. And so it's a little different in that sense than just selling an item. It adds a little bit of a wrinkle to it. And actually, if you go on my Patreon now, if you're a Patreon member, I'm gonna do a video now kind of explaining that side of it a little bit and how it differs from the standard business model. So thanks for watching. I hope this is a helpful video. Be sure to come back Friday for another vlog. We're gonna look at some really cool stuff that hatched. As always, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.